Yeah, I've been a member of MACNY for a year and a half, maybe going on. And I've been super impressed with all that MACNY does. I serve on the National Association of Environmental Professionals and have been a member or volunteer in some way with other industry organizations. And I'm just always impressed with the quality of presentations and training that they give and just the attention that they give to each person. So definitely proud to be here with MACNY presenting this. So today I'm presenting a presentation called Strategy Kickstarter, How to Get Out of the Woods and Onto the Path of Success. So I think any of you who work with strategy or strategic plans, or you own a business, you might have one, might not have one. A lot of times it can just feel like you are overwhelmed and really trying to use your strategy to find that clear path, but not able to actually make that happen. So I'm going to talk about some reasons why that might be, and how, if you are doing a traditional strategic plan, there are some ways we can upgrade that to help us get more clarity around it. So for today, if you could grab something to write on, if you haven't already, something to take notes, but also there are 2 exercises that are going to have breakout sessions. So I'm going to talk for about 60 minutes, but that will include the breakout sessions, and then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So also write down any questions that you have as I'm going through the material, and we'll cover that at the end. I want to make sure that I don't want to talk at you the whole time, but at the same time, I want to make sure I get through all of this, because this topic could go on for days. And then sort of alluding to that is, this is a prelude to an actual hands-on workshop called the Strategy Design Lab that will be starting on July 1st. So that's a small group, 3 to 5 participants, and I'll talk about that more at the end, but this is sort of leading up to that. And if anything I talk about today is like, yeah, I need to do that, or I like what you said and I want to put that into action, we'll be doing that in the design lab. So I have 3 goals for today. And the first one is to convince you that you need a strategic upgrade. Whether you don't have one at all, you have one that maybe you can't identify as an actual strategic plan, or it's just on paper, or you love your strategic plan. There are some ideas and things I'll share with you that hopefully you could just take with you and plug into what you're already doing. I'm going to talk about the difference between traditional strategic planning and strategic operations. So nothing I show you here today is going to be brand new, probably, unless you are new to strategic planning altogether. But it's those little differences that help us get ahead. So think about taxi service and Uber. They're not fundamentally different, but one has been a game changer for the way that we transport around these days. And the last thing is, I want you to just, no matter, like I said, no matter what level you're at, that you walk away with at least one next step that you can put into action. All right, so a little bit about me. I help visionaries become actionaries. So I'm a big people person with a lot of technical ability. So I help people who have those big visions put them into action through strategy or impact leadership development training to become actionaries. And those are those people who can see the big picture and put the work in to make it happen. If you are a visionary, you need to be surrounded by actionaries. So we do some future leader training as well to help learn how to be entrepreneurs. I grew up with a father who was both into arts and science and electronics. He worked in electronics companies, as we used to call them, before IT and technology. And I watched him get laid off from IBM every few years, and he would then bounce back into the arts and do Bob Ross paintings or build guitars, and then he would get hired back again. And so I followed that path a little bit. I started out in photography and design, and then I ended up working for an international tech company and built them a CRM in 1999. If you can flash back to 1999, CRMs didn't exist. There was no HubSpot or MailChimp. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just solving a problem, but they sent me to Ireland to implement that system for their European office. A year later, the IT world crashed, the dot-com bubble. So I came back to the States, back to Florida where I grew up, and got a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of South Florida. And I love my science degree. It helps me see the connectivity of the world and in business. And I then spent 10 years in a local environmental government agency. In that 10 years, because of all my technical ability and ability to to help them see their vision and put it into action. I managed 4 programs. I started a GIS intern program. I was our resident GIS expert, seagrass expert. I was the artificial reef coordinator. Too bad it was in Tampa Bay. It's not the best place to go diving. I managed $2 million in grants funds for small environmental cleanups, community grants, but also for large public-private multi-million-dollar like wetland creation or restoration projects. So I worked with a lot of different companies in different fields and construction, gained a ton of experience through that. 2009, the economy tanked again. And so one of our commissioners wanted us to get an award for excellence. So that started my journey on business and how to succeed in business. I spent 7 years as an examiner with the Florida Sterling Council, and they do Malcolm Baldrige Excellence Awards at the state level. And that was, I love that. It took all of the technical skills that I had and able to see how you actually plug that into vision and strategy. And I wrote an award-winning application for our organization through that process. At the end of that year, the last year I was involved with that, they actually started an award for manufacturing. So that's my connection here. Long story short, how am I here with MACNY? I was able to do excellence awards and go in and do strengths and weakness analysis for excellence in manufacturing companies. And that was so much fun. I really loved that, especially again, with my science background, to be on the shop floor and see everything, all the different parts happening from data to technology to chemistry. I love every bit of it. So in 2015, I resigned from the government agency and started my own consulting firm. And in 2017, I moved here to Syracuse. One of the things while I was growing up is I didn't really have any role models. So that CRM I built in 1999 and the websites I was building in 1998 and starting my own company for graphic design, paid my way through college doing that. I didn't have any mentors. I didn't have any women in technology to follow. Women who code didn't exist. And I still think now when I search role model, you only find sports, you find actors and actresses, but you don't get a lot of business role models that come up when you search Google for role models. So I want to change that global culture, so to say, that we are looking more at people in leadership and in their day-to-day roles as role models and not just sports figures and people's on the box of Wheaties. So if you know people, I know you know people. So when you see people who are leading the way, doing something that is above and beyond, that is really role modeling, which means living, breathing, walking our behaviors, use the hashtag role model up. And I'm looking for those so that I can reshare them and we can start to make that change. So that was enough about me, but I'd like to know about you. So we don't have time to go around and do introductions like we might normally do in person, but if you could put into the chat box your name, your business, if I might not have heard of your business, maybe what you do, and then why you came here today. So if you could tell me what was it about the title or the description that you wanted to come here to learn about, and then when you're in the first breakout session, I can take a look at those and make sure I address anything that you wanted to know about that I hadn't planned to talk about. Right, so this quote, strategy without tactics, so strategy without implementation is the slowest route to victory. And tactics, implementation without strategy is the noise before the defeat. This is from The Art of War by Sun Tzu. I love this book. I'm anti-war, I'm a peaceful person. And when I first read it, it talks a lot about your enemy, going to war against your enemy. And I think most people when they read this book, they first think that your enemy is your competition, your competitors. But I would encourage you, if you've read this book or if you do read it, that you think of it as everything that works against you as your enemies. I don't like to think of competitors as competitors because that automatically puts up defensive shields. But if we can think of people who work in our same space as our comparisons, they are the people and the companies that we're looking at to see, are we the best? Are we third? Where are we in this playing field? But if we can look at the things that are against us, viruses, risks, status quo is an enemy. So the first thing I want to tell you about why you need strategy and you need to take it seriously and make it part of how you operate is because you need this to battle against all of the enemies that are coming against you to try to defeat your organization. So just my little plug there for reading about strategy. If you can read through this list really quickly, we want to talk about a really quick fit check for your organization as far as strategy goes. So if you are feeling overwhelmed, either yourself as business leaders or your staff, that's a strategy issue. You've got something going on with capacity. Confusion, we don't know what decisions to make. That's a strategy issue. Anxiety, we are not sure if we've made the right decisions. We aren't sure that we're prepared for what's coming. Those are strategy issues. Poor and declining culture, strategy issues. Think back from the last couple of months. Have you been constantly reactive or have you been pretty proactive? Those are signs of how good or poor your strategy is. Take a look at the rest of those. If any of those are something you feel is an issue that you have, then it's probably indicative of something going on with your strategy. So I wanted to go through a couple of strategic planning myths. And the first one is that strategy is only for big businesses. And with any of these myths, there are truths to it. It is true that big business is more likely to have a strategic plan and to have one in place that they would actually consider effective. However, I argue that all of us, again, are at war with our enemies and all of the things that are working against our ability to succeed. And if you are a small company, you have more need to have strategic planning and a good strategy in place because you have more risk. So the larger companies, you might not have more risk, but you have a different risk. Larger companies typically have more access to capital and cash, funds. So they can be loosey-goosey with their strategy if they want it to be. But as a smaller company, if you don't have a strategy, you might be dead in the water if you aren't prepared for the things that are coming. So strategic planning should be done for everyone. I do it. And I know amongst my peers, I've had a much smoother last couple of months than a lot of other small business who are suffering right now. The second one is that strategic plans just collect dust. This again is another one that has its roots in truth. For a lot of people, a strategic plan is a thing on paper. I have worked for companies and I have seen companies who spend more time putting that piece of paper together than actually implementing. So remember the quote, a strategy without tactics. We need to have a balance of both things. And in traditional strategic planning, it is about a lot about that document and a thing that you do. So we're talking about a mindset shift today. The third one is competitive advantage is dead. And I snagged this one from the Harvard Business Review. And what they're talking about is that there are some people who believe we shouldn't bother with a strategic plan because there's, first of all, they're thinking that a strategic plan is only for your means to deliver a competitive advantage. And secondly, that because of there's so much change, so many startups, so many fast followers, there are people who are waiting for you to lose your competitive advantage so they can come in and be better at what you did. Think Airbnb. And I would argue that that's even more reason to have a strategic plan, to have strategic operations, because you have to continually be figuring out how you can stay on top and maintain a competitive advantage. And for some companies, think Amazon, you don't have a competitive advantage in just one area, maybe multiple areas, but that has to be part of how you strategize. Without that, you will never, you won't accidentally walk into multiple competitive advantages. The fourth one is it's too constricting. Again, this can be true, especially with traditional strategic planning. These are our 6 processes. We have these meetings, only these 5 people come to them. That's absolutely too constricting, but that means you're doing it wrong. And then fifth one, it's too much work. If you think strategic planning or having strategic operations is too much work, then what are you doing? Like, work is work. Where business is work, we have to put in the effort. So if the too much work part, I think, is tied to strategic plans just collect dust. If you're putting too much effort and work into polishing it up, publishing it, putting it into posters, whatever, then yeah, it probably is too much work. But I would like you to make a mind shift again. Strategic operations is going to be not about a thing that you do, but a way that you do business. So it doesn't become too much work, it just is the work. So I want you to absorb this for just a second. Just imagine what you could do, what your company could do if leadership and strategy were your competitive advantage. So that means out of all your comparisons, you do leadership and you do strategy better than the rest of them. Again, think Amazon, think 3M, think Apple. These are the companies that seem to just always have it figured out. They're one step ahead of everyone else. They are actually shaping the way their industries and our lives happen. That's where we want you to get to. So that brings us already to our first exercise. Like I said, I didn't want you to fall asleep on me this morning. This is one of the first exercises in the strategy design lab. We take a look at strategic operations, and these are the 6 steps that I teach. And when I say steps, there's not really a good way to, it's phases, steps, cycle. Once you're doing them, they're just flowing into a repetition. But to put them on paper, they need numbers. So when we initially step into this, we're going to focus on this piece, which is looking at what elements of strategic planning do you already have? And this may or may not be something you've ever done before. So we're looking at, and if you have your paper out right now, what I want you to do is to answer these questions, and then we'll jump into the breakout room, and then I'll tell you how that will go. So just for yourselves, put 4 boxes or 4 sections on your paper and write out, what are your strategic planning events? So those are probably the most obvious one that might come to mind is like an annual retreat. That's maybe your biggest strategic planning event. Then what other meetings do you have? Do you meet as senior leaders once a month? Do you meet with stakeholders ever? Like whatever meetings you have that you actually have a section on the agenda that you talk about strategic planning. And that could be an all hands meeting and you have 5 minutes, 10 minutes dedicated to it. Or like I said, some sort of stakeholder or advisor meeting.
I didn't catch that. Try tapping.
And then secondly, what are your micro plans? So this is when I'm talking about shifting away from strategic planning to strategic operations. This is your one strategic operations strategic plan to rule them all. So we're going to pull in those other micro plans. So if you have a separate, something you've been treating separately as a marketing plan, a sales plan, risk, shop floor, what are those other micro plans that you might have? And then the third thing is, what software and tools are you using? So smaller companies are probably just using Excel spreadsheets. The next level up from that is something off the shelf like OnStrategy or Cascade. And then beyond that, if you are a larger company, you probably have had it built into your ERP system. And the last thing is then who participates, who comes to those meetings, who's the owner, who's responsible for those micro plans, and then has access to the software, who's responsible for managing that software as far as the strategic planning goes, and then who has access to it. So if you could just take a minute or two to jot down those things. Now, if you don't know, just put, I don't know. That might not be something that you are responsible for, that you even know these things. But put it in there from your perspective. Maybe if you're a manager, what events do you go to that you know that you talk about strategic planning? So I'll give you just a minute on that again. All right, so continuing on that conversation then, most companies have a business plan. That's the first thing they tell you to do when you go into the SBA or get started with your startup or want to go seek funds, is you need a business plan. But essentially a business plan is a checklist. That's what do you do? What's your mission? What are your long-term goals? What's your market like? What services do you deliver? Check all the boxes. We know what we're doing and move on, but there is no actual strategy involved with a business plan. The next level up from that is traditional strategic planning, which is quite often a document. When I ask people about their strategic plan, when do you do or how do you do a strategic plan? A lot of times they will talk about it as a thing that they do. We did that. One of my clients, when I first started working with them, said, "Oh, we did a SWOT a couple of years ago. I think we should do it again." Not exactly a strategic plan, but they have that document on paper that says, here's our objectives for the next 1 to 5 years. And that's really the piece that holds people back is we get together in a room, we brainstorm our ideas, here's the things we need to work on, and then serve out those action plans to people. And then we go back to our day to day. So it's not integrated, which is one part of the problem. And then secondly, it's just too slow for today's business pace. So what we need to be shifting into is strategic operations. And this is a way to do business. It's not a thing that you do. So it's a step above that piece of paper. There will be some documentation that says how we do this, but that's all that should really be, is the how that we do it. There's so many ways now. You don't need to have a PDF with static objectives for the next 1 to 5 years that don't change, and that also make me feel like people feel like they're failures if they don't accomplish those goals. This is strategic operations is a way to make decisions for your business, not just a way to come up with objectives. So in a traditional strategic plan, they're linear. We're talking about, if you look up any company's strategic plan, it says, here's our 2019 to 2025 strategic plan. And it's how we came up with this set of objectives and then the list of those objectives. And it's usually a pretty lengthy list of objectives. Some may actually get done, some might not. And then those checkpoints for when you're checking to see if they are done can a lot of times be pretty far out there. They're goal-based. Here's our objectives, we want to accomplish these goals. They're in 1 to 5 year cycles. It's just too long. It's considered a thing that you do. Because of those long-term cycles, you get a lot of drift away from your vision and what you're trying to accomplish, which leads to a lot of waste, waste in time, cost, and effort. But today, what we really need is strategic operations. They're integrated cycles. It's not this linear 1 to 5 year thing. It's results-based. It is not goal-based. So we know what our goals are, but what are our results, indicators, triggers along the way? It's continuous. It's a way that you operate. This is not something that you do. People don't like traditional strategic planning because they're like, oh my God, I have to prepare for this all day meeting and I have to think about all the problems that I've had. When you do it continuously, it just flows. You want that flow for it. It helps you to stay on track and it helps you to be lean. We talk about being lean in manufacturing on the shop floor, but then we're all kinds of sloppy in our strategy. So we need to lean that down as well. To illustrate this point, this top figure is a traditional strategic plan. It's out to 1, 5 year, 6 year cycles. And because of that length and that linear part of it, you end up with this drift. And that drift means when you reach that ending point where you redo your strategic plan, you have to course correct. And all of that course correct is also going to cost you time, energy, and effort. So, and you miss opportunities to learn in there, which is huge. If you want those competitive advantage, how you make strategy your competitive advantage is you give yourself those opportunities to learn. So the bottom portion of this figure is strategic operations. It's cyclical. It helps you stay on track. You don't have that drift that you have in a traditional linear strategic plan. And you're incorporating opportunities to learn, and that helps you not only accomplish more, but to do it better. So in your strategic plan, this is your decision-making control room. You have integrated systems for learning, for integrating those micro plans so they're not floating out there doing their own thing, prioritizing. We're not setting 16 objectives for the next 5 years. We're going to pick our top 3. Now, depending what size your organization is, that might be 1 per division or however that might go. But, and then we're going to watch those results. If in 4 months we haven't even started one of those projects, maybe we weren't supposed to start that project, or we need to do something to give it some life. To manage our ideas, to manage the risk, and we need systems for problem solving. So I want to touch back on the too much drift piece and what that actually looks like. So when you set off in your strategy and your mission, you're in the boat here. We're trying to get to our vision. Now the vision is on the horizon. We may never actually land on it, but that's our That's our guidepost. That's where we're trying to go. If we head out with 20% variation, now this is just hypothetical, and that could be, so we have 16 objectives, 20% of those don't happen, or if they fail, that could be the 20% variation. Darren Hardy, who's one of my mentors, talks about if you flew from LA to New York City and you were 1 degree off, your airplane would land somewhere between here and Albany. That's just in a couple of hours. If you spend 1 to 5 years, 20% off course from where you're trying to be, you have a lot of course correction to make and a lot of wasted time, energy, and effort. Now, if you reduce those cycle times to just 3 years, look how much less effort and time you're wasting. And if you also reduce the variation, then you have much less to course correct. Finally, imagine that you are on 6 months, and I am a proponent of quarterly cycles, and you have 10% variation. You're reducing the variation because you have cycles of learning. You have ideas that you're implementing. You have much more. Once you get good at strategy and you make that one of your advantages, you reduce that variation. So this is where you're starting to get really lean, and you know you're on track. Imagine how confident that feels, how much less anxiety you would have knowing that this is how you operate and that you are this good. So why is this so hard? There's several reasons. One is not one size fits all. You cannot look at Google and copy their playbook. What you can do is grab their best practices, and that's what I'm doing with the workshops and the presentations and information that I share. I've done the Excellence Awards. I've done evaluations for big organizations. There's tons of books published on what makes a company last, built to last. It's a wonderful book that talks about being a value-driven organization is the way to go if your goal is to succeed and be resilient in the long term. But it isn't one size fits all. You can't just go copy what someone else does. But there is a backbone that you can put your company on top of. It's not tangible. When we talk about strategic operations, it is intangible. So because this is a decision-making machine, essentially. And so that's why people lean towards having a hard time letting go of traditional strategic planning, because they want that here, something they can produce and hand to their stakeholders and whatever. It evolves. So as I showed you in the diagrams, when you're evolving, you're learning, you're changing. So if it's evolving, you need to have a way to document that process that isn't on a PDF for 5 years. And it doesn't end, it's a journey. So another thing, when you shift from strategic plan and everyone is begrudgingly pulled into it and into strategic operations, you have the opportunity to make it something exciting. When you're like, we are the best at our strategy, we are going to outshine our comparisons or lead the way for our comparisons because of the way that we strategize, then it becomes an exciting journey that people want to be on. And the last thing is just no one showed you this before. I have researched all the tools out there, all the off-the-shelf cloud-based solutions for monitoring strategic plans. They all talk about the traditional way of doing strategic planning. They're still very helpful tools, especially in rolling out to departments and divisions and teams what their goals are and how they roll up into the overall strategy. So definitely not something to be ignored, but no one has really showed you. If you don't have an MBA, you've likely never really even seen how strategic planning actually works. Here's another key piece in what I teach, and this is completely from my observation and what I've learned through the Malcolm Baldrige process, is that you need to make your business fabulous. And you can do this through your strategic operations. And that means focused, aligned, and balanced, noting that balance does not mean equal. Focused means you know where you're headed. That vision is clear. You know what your values are, so you can make better and faster decisions. You're able to stop chasing shiny pennies. You know what you're saying yes and no to, which helps you get over procrastination. You waste less money when you are focused and saying no to things and saying yes to the right things. Definitely less trial and error, and you have just higher confidence in what you're doing. Alignment, we are operating within our values. If an opportunity arises that is not within our values, we don't take it. So we are saving time and energy by saying no right away. We are having stronger messages because we have better fit with our customers, and they end up coming to you. When you have a company that does a thing well and aligns on values with customers, that's when they start coming to you. And when you start providing that quality, then they start referring people to you. So that feels good, right? You have a lot less anxiety and less confusion when you are aligned with your values and your mission and what it is that you do. So think about COVID-19, the companies that were really solid in their core and knew exactly why they exist. They're the ones that were able to make the small shifts and still keep their eye on the long-term goals. Balance. So balance does not mean equal. Usually one of the ways to make this happen is through a balanced scorecard. That's again something small businesses usually don't have in their toolbox. And that just means that you are balancing your resources and efforts and timelines into the different areas of your business. A lot of companies get focused solely on finances and their financials, and then their customer service suffers. Some focus solely on customer service and their employees suffer. You've got to have a balanced approach because all of these things are key to your success. And finally, 2 more points on this. Having that focus, alignment, and balance helps you to pivot. Like I just mentioned, the companies that are surviving and made really quick decisions here in COVID-19 are the ones that had this already going on. Being focused, aligned, and balanced helps you day to day in your business to hit those moving targets, because the horse and the environment in this picture is the world around us. It shifts and moves, and we have to ride that horse and our business on top of that moving target, and then still keep our eye on the target and hit those goals. So when you have a strategy and strategic operations that is on point, then you're able to be secure in your seat. You know what it is that you do, keep your eyes on your goals, and then just block out those distractions. Other companies too have just been and business owners just very distracted with all that's going on. But when you can dive in and know what it is that you do, then you can be more focused and successful. This is the last thing I'm going to show you to try to convince you, still on that first goal, convincing you that you need to upgrade your strategy. One of you just said you completed your MBA. You probably saw a business life cycle diagram figure in one of your courses or more. And it typically shows startup phase, scale up, growth, and then this myth called maturity. I don't think maturity ever existed in the business life cycle, but that is kind of the mindset that most organizations had, and some still do, that we're going to reach some sort of point where we've made it. There is no point, especially today, where you've just made it. I mean, think about Nike. They don't make one pair of Air Jordans and that's it. Like, you have to constantly be coming up with new product, new innovations. That refers back to the Harvard Business Review's myth about competitive advantage being dead. You don't just get to have your competitive advantage and just sit there. Status quo is our enemy, as we talked about, and we're trying to avoid the plateau here. So your strategy when you're starting up is really trying to connect your idea with the right people, with the right message. And once you've got that locked in, then you are cleared to scale up. And then your strategy changes again into growth. But beyond that, you have to be in the mindset that we do not plateau. We fight status quo. We're always trying to reinvent ourselves to continuously improve. And you have to actively do those things. They don't just happen. If you want to coast, you're going to decline. And all of those people who are looking for the opportunity to come in and take your market share, that's when they strike. So that's my last pitch for convincing you've got to have a good strategy in place. And then finally, moving into what does this look like? What am I actually teaching you in the strategy design lab and what to do? Again, this isn't necessarily going to look very different on the surface, but a few fundamental differences. One is this core calibration. There isn't another strategic plan, course, or process going to teach you to do this core calibration and to do it first. Most processes I see have checking your mission, vision, values somewhere in the middle, like either second or third step. So they're doing a SWOT analysis and prioritizing your ideas without getting grounded in who it is that you are and why you do what you do. So this is key from what I've witnessed and my own experience is that you need to have this core calibration as part of the process in the cycles. And it needs to be first up front. This is the thing that guides every other thing that you do. So when we go through that core calibration, which is reviewing things like our mission, vision, values, our core competencies, our competitive advantages, our regulatory changes, what we're looking for, our gaps and our unknowns, and we collect those. And then second, we look at our situational analysis. We're looking at what has changed around us in the environment. So you've heard of pestle analysis and environmental scans. There's lots of different tools for every company at different levels of sophistication or complexity to do this. But what we want to do is add that, all of our ideas and opportunities and things that we come across, and put them into this bucket with our gaps and unknowns. And then we continue this where we're filtering out our ideas and opportunities and looking at now our operational awareness. What does the feedback from our customers tell us? If we're not collecting feedback from our customers, what do we need to know? What lessons have we learned? I'm going to leave this presentation today, write down what lessons I learned from this, what went well, what didn't go well. And that all gets pulled into my bucket into this next fourth step, which is turning my ideas into action. So what normally happens here is a company will do a SWOT analysis. They come to the meeting totally unprepared, having collected all of this stuff for the last quarter, bring it into this meeting, and then look at all of those ideas together. The SWOT analysis is our fourth opportunity to look for what can we do. So here we do what I call SWOT 2.0. It's not the traditional SWOT that you've seen that's just 4 boxes. That to me is missing a huge element of brainstorming. So we look at our SWOT, pull out another whole set of ideas, add all of these together with the ones we've already collected, and then we look at what are we going to do next. And then we're not picking all of them. We're not saying we have 16 slots or picking 16 things. We're picking the top ones that have the most impact. And for the next quarter, that's what we hammer on. Then, then we track our progress on those. How did we do? How are they doing? What do we need to change? Is there a reason one of these didn't start? They may continue on, but we will continue to review them through this process. We haven't handed them off to some other manager who's directing them for the next 5 years, and we don't find out a year to 5 years later that it hasn't even started. And then we improve this entire system. So every quarter we go around this, or every 6 months, we go around this machine and we say, okay, we didn't have a good enough process for looking at our risk. What do we change about that? Do we assign somebody to it? Do we use a new tool? This whole thing, this was great, but I don't want to use this on spreadsheets anymore. Let's get an off-the-shelf software. Like every single time we look at how do we improve it. That's how this becomes a competitive advantage, is to continuously improve it. Okay, we're rolling into the next exercise, which is the first step that I talked about in the system. So that's the core calibration. So this is only pretty much one half of it. But I don't want to overwhelm you. What I really want to look at on here is the values. It's very important to be a values-driven organization, especially today. After the last 3 months, I've seen so much more urge and urgency for companies to step up and be values-based organizations. People want to know what you stand for now before they spend their money with you. So on the left-hand side, we've got mission, vision, values, core competencies, our long-term goals, governance. These are things that don't change very much, but we still need to review them. And we need to review them and say, is this the mission we're actually living? Are we actually carrying forth with this? Do we have a new leader? Is there's a new leader who's come in, like you talked about with transitioning generations? Are these the same? Do we still have the same vision? A lot of problem you have when you're transitioning from one generation to the next is your vision has changed. They had I know that my parents and my grandparents had a much different vision for even my own life than I do. So certainly for your business, that is the case. And you've got to get clear on which one are you working towards. And if you haven't even done that, the rest of it's going to be a struggle. So I would urge any of you to start at this point and to get really clear on these things. A lot of people will say, oh, I hear this all the time. Oh, I have this course and I'll teach you how to do X, Y, and Z. It starts with your mission. And they go, I already got that. I already have that. I promise you don't. Especially the people who say, I got that, because it can change in different subtle ways and it changes over time, but it shouldn't change a lot. So once you've got those things, the things on the right are things that are core to your business, but they will change. So that's your customer segments. You might have a new product or you might want to expand. So you need to bring in a new customer segment. You have to manage these with purpose and intent and pull them into your strategy. Otherwise they end up out here in left field doing their own thing. And then you're not able to balance all of this. Your brand, think about restaurants is an easy one to think about brands. They have a logo that was one way in the 80s and then they changed it in the 90s and they've changed it now for today. That's a brand still solid in their values and their mission and vision. They're usually the same colors, the same sort of boldness, but they change them subtly to meet the times. What makes you unique? You need to constantly know what that is, because in this ever-changing environment, you might be unique today, but not tomorrow if 4 other comparisons come in with a similar service or product. So exercise 2, are you a values-driven business? And so for this, like I said, values is so important, especially today. So very simple exercise, write down what your company's written values are. Think about posters around, emails they send out. What are the written values that you know are part of your company's business? And then we need to figure out, are we living those? There are some that aren't written. Do we have a value that we actually do that we haven't written down? So when it's not written down, we can't leverage it. So we need to be looking at our values. If our value is environment, we need to be looking at, are our supply chains environmentally friendly? Are we walking the talk? So provide those examples. If you say that environment is a value, provide me the examples. Where do you have an environmental management plan? Do you have a sustainable supply chain? Have you been providing reusable plastic bottles to your staff? Are you providing plastic bottles? Are you living those values? And the stronger you get on those things, the stronger you have that connection to your customers. So that's the simple exercise for right now. What are your company's written values? Which ones aren't written? And then write down those examples. And we will jump into the same breakout session as last time. The one thing I want you to do before you leave is pick a next step. So there's a lot of other ways, simple ways that you can kind of kickstart your strategic planning and strategic operations. One is to choose a theme for the next quarter. So this is just a way to build excitement and to maintain focus, is essentially to pick a theme. So when I started 2020, my theme was amplify. It's still amplify, but things change. This is why we can't have a theme for the next 1 to 5 years. We need to have them in quarters. So pick a theme that will drive some excitement. So if you have a new product launch, maybe it has something to do with that. If you have an anniversary coming up, maybe it has something to do with that. If you have bringing on new customers, could be something with that. Create a strategy specific calendar. So one of the keys to having strategic operations is to have a really well integrated and used calendar. You need to have, for example, I just use it because I'm a small business. I just have a Google Calendar that's separate from my personal one that I can turn on and off. It tells me my different checkpoints per month, per quarter. So every Friday is when I put my checkpoints, and I have time to work on strategy, just a few minutes every single week, which one is like doing my inventory and taxes, the second, and then it might be one week is review my risk review and my risk list. And that is just something I do for 10 minutes. I look at it, I make sure nothing new, no triggers have come up. I think recently I added, because of the whole Black Lives Matter and those things coming around, I don't have any actual written policies because I have contract work, but I don't have employees. But I thought, you know what, that's a risk. I'm going to start upgrading that and creating my policies. So that's how we incorporate learning, and that's how we can be continuously improving, which is a huge key to that long-term success and gaining competitive advantage. So again, 1 month it might tell me I need to review my personal training plan, and 1 month it tells me that I need to look at what are the other things, my marketing plan. So that's how I integrate the things into it. So one thing could be just creating that calendar, and then you want to add the dates to it. Another action that you could take is to just do more research on how to work with a strategic plan. You could attend my design lab workshop, which I will talk about just after going through this list. I'm happy to send you my foundation calibration checklist. It's not a checklist, it's a worksheet. If that's what you need to get started, I'm happy to share that with you. You can let me know and I'll send it to you. Start getting better at prioritizing. So prioritize your daily, monthly, weekly to-do list. Get better with the fabulous part, being focused, aligned, and balanced, which you can do through the foundation calibration worksheet. Schedule a meeting with your team. Let's talk about all the stuff that you learned here today. Do those 2 exercises with them potentially, or you can read The Art of War. And so if you could pick one of these things to leave here to do today to give your strategy a boost, that would fill my 3rd goal for meeting with you this morning. So, you know, I'd like to just put in the chat box a little Y or a little no. And did I convince you that you need a better way to strategize? Have I helped you understand the difference between a strategic plan and strategic operations? Completely different mindset. And were you able to pick a next step? I would just love to know how we did here today. Give myself some feedback. Any other feedback you'd like to share, either here or privately, you can email me. I'll be sharing my contact info. The Strategy Design Lab, we'll be doing this virtually, and it happens in 2-hour sessions over the next, actually 2.5. So it's 2 hours content plus a half an hour wiggle room there, depending on how much discussion happens in the workshop. And it will be July 1st, 8th, and 15th. We go through all of the steps that I showed you before, get you into a point where you actually can move forward and implement this. And what we focus on is here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the first day we're really looking at that foundation calibration, getting you started, that strategic inventory. What do you already have? Second day, we talk about how we get really good with prioritizing, pulling in all those ideas that I tell you go through the system and into your ideas into action. And the third day is all about putting those ideas into action and how you do that. And then we talk about that strategic calendar and how we keep this thing going. Now, everyone who attends is going to be automatically and optionally enrolled in my Accountability Buddies program, which is for anyone who's taken this workshop before. We meet once a month to talk about all of this. I want to make sure that people who go through this workshop, it isn't another, yeah, that's cool, but how do I actually do it? And then you stop doing it because you don't have the support to make it happen. This is not easy. So any of you who are feeling like, you know, a failure for not succeeding with your strategic planning, it's not easy stuff. It takes a lot of effort to keep it going and maintain it, but it is definitely worth it. I will say that I also can do that if you want to just have this at your organization for your entire strategic planning team. I'm happy to come in and do a full day workshop or do it virtually over 3 days for just your team as well. So you can contact me about that. If you're interested, you've just realized that you are the leadership, but your management isn't knowledgeable enough about this stuff. I have an online course that teaches that actionable actionary leadership and entrepreneurship that will talk about how to do strategy, what is a role model business, all that stuff. So if you need to train up your leaders, I also have a course for that as well. So there's my contact info, and I think that about wraps it up.